The old people of the high desert used to say that the land remembers every footstep. It remembers the ones made in fear, the ones made in hunger, and the ones made in love that came too late. Long before the rail lines cut the valleys and before fences split the plains, an Apache widower walked those remembered paths alone. He moved with the quiet patience of a man who had already buried his heart once and had no wish to watch it bleed again. Most who saw him thought him poor, broken, and half forgotten by the world. They did not know that this was the life he chose, not the life forced upon him. He had once been a man of standing among his people. He had known laughter by the fire and the weight of another's hand resting easy in his own. When sickness came like a night wind and took his wife before the first frost, it left behind a hollow place that no song could fill. He burned her things as custom demanded, spoke her name one last time to the stars, and then turned away from the life he had lived before. He told no one of his plans. He traded fine hides for rough ones, set aside his good weapons, and dressed in clothes patched so many times they barely remembered their first shape. He became a man others looked past. The settlements at the edge of Apache land were changing fast. Wooden buildings rose where mesquite once stood, and strangers arrived with dust on their boots and hunger in their eyes. Among them were women who carried their own quiet burdens. Some were widowed by war or fever. Some were cast aside for being too old, too plain, too sharp of tongue, or too slow to bow. They worked, endured, and learned not to hope too loudly. In those places, beauty was measured in youth and obedience, and kindness was often confused with weakness. The widower watched these settlements from a distance at first. He saw the way men looked through women instead of at them. He saw how laughter stopped when certain women entered a room. He listened more than he spoke, learning the weight of silence in a world that talked too much. He was not searching for beauty as others did, he was searching for truth. He believed that a woman who had been rejected by many would see more clearly than one who had always been chosen first. So he lived as poor on purpose. He worked when work was offered and walked away when it was not. He slept under open skies and accepted thin meals without complaint. People assumed he had nothing to offer but a tired body and a sad story. That was exactly what he wanted them to believe. A man stripped of pride could see the world without its masks. Among the women of the settlement was one who stood apart, though not by choice. She had been turned away so often that her back seemed to carry the memory of every closed door. Some said she was unlucky. Others whispered she asked too many questions or spoke too honestly. Her hands were rough from labor, her face marked by sun and time. She was not cruel or bitter, but she had learned not to smile unless she meant it. Children trusted her. Animals lingered near her without fear. Men, however, rarely stayed long. She noticed the widower before he noticed her, or so it seemed. He came to trade simple goods, never raising his voice, never boasting. When others mocked his worn clothes or laughed at his silence, he did not bristle or shrink. He simply waited. There was something steady about him, something that did not ask for approval. The woman watched this and felt a quiet pull she did not yet understand. Their first words were plain ones. She offered him water when she saw his canteen was empty. He thanked her without surprise, as if kindness was the most natural thing in the world. They spoke of the weather, of work, of how the desert teaches patience. No promises were made, no stories of the past were shared. Still, something settled between them like a stone placed carefully in a river, steadying the flow. As weeks passed, they spoke more often. He never asked why she was alone. She never asked why he lived as he did. That unspoken respect grew stronger than many loud declarations. She saw how he listened when she spoke, how his eyes did not wander when others passed. He saw how she stood her ground without raising her voice, how she gave help without keeping score. They were two people shaped by loss, recognizing familiar edges in each other. Others noticed too, and not all were pleased. Some men scoffed at the idea that a woman so often refused might choose for herself. Some women warned her that a poor widower could offer only more hardship. She heard them all and weighed their words carefully. She had learned the cost of listening too much to those who did not live her life. When she looked at the widower, she did not see poverty, she saw peace. She saw a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide, or so it appeared. What she did not know was that his poverty was a veil, one woven from grief and careful intent. He had not yet decided whether to lift it. He feared that if she saw the man he once was, she might see him as others did, through the lens of advantage rather than understanding. He told himself that love chosen without knowledge was fragile, yet love tested by truth could endure. The question was when truth should be given. One evening, as the sun bled red across the hills, they sat near the edge of the settlement where the land still breathed freely. He spoke of the old ways, of listening to the earth and honoring silence. She spoke of learning to stand alone without becoming hard. Their words moved carefully, like hands feeling their way in the dark. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt the pull of a future not shaped entirely by memory. The woman felt it too, though she named it differently. She felt chosen by herself at last. Not claimed, not settled for, but chosen with clear eyes. The thought frightened her more than rejection ever had. Choosing meant risk. It meant stepping forward without knowing if the ground would hold. She had lived too long being decided against to turn away now. When she told him she wished to walk beside him, not behind or ahead, he was silent for a long time. The desert wind filled the space between them, carrying the smell of dust and sage. In that silence, the widower felt the weight of his secret press against his chest. To accept her choice without revealing the truth felt like a betrayal. To reveal it risked losing the one person who had seen him as he was pretending to be, not as he had been. He asked for time. She agreed, though her eyes searched his face for answers he did not yet give. That night, sleep did not come easily to either of them. He stared at the stars, thinking of the life he had buried and the one now asking to be born. She lay awake, wondering if choosing a man with shadows was braver than choosing none at all. By morning, whispers had already begun. Some said she was foolish, some said he had trapped her with kindness. Neither of them spoke in defense. They knew the truth, or part of it lived between them alone. What none could guess was how close they stood to a turning point that would change both their lives. As the widower prepared to meet her again, he carried more than his worn pack. He carried the choice he could no longer avoid. The past he had hidden was about to rise, whether by his hand or another's, and as the woman waited, steady and uncertain, the desert seemed to hold its breath, knowing that what was about to be revealed would either bind them together or break them apart forever. The morning came pale and slow, like it was unsure whether it wanted to rise at all. The widower woke before the sun, as he always did, and sat with his back against a weathered rock. He watched the light creep over the land, revealing scars left by wagon wheels and footprints pressed deep by years of passing feet. This land had seen men arrive hungry and leave harder. It had seen promises made in confidence and broken in silence. He wondered what it would witness next. He thought of the woman waiting for him, standing somewhere between trust and doubt. He had seen that look before, long ago, in his wife's eyes the day she asked him if the fighting would ever end. He had answered then with hope he believed was strong. This time he was not sure which answer would do less harm. He rubbed the old scar along his forearm, a reminder of a life he pretended no longer belonged to him. His past was not just grief. It was blood, decisions made under pressure, and a reputation earned in days when strength was measured by survival. Among his people, he had once been known as a man who could be relied upon when things fell apart. Others had followed him without question. That memory still lived in him, quiet but awake. He had buried it under plainclothes and lowered eyes, but it was never truly gone. The settlement stirred as he walked toward it. A few early risers nodded without warmth. A trader watched him closely, as if measuring something unseen. Rumors moved faster than wagons in places like this. He could feel them brushing against his back. A poor Apache widower did not draw much attention until he stood too close to a woman no one else wanted. Then suddenly everyone noticed. The woman spent her morning working as she always did. She scrubbed floors, mended cloth, and kept her thoughts close. Her life had taught her that hope could be useful, but only if handled carefully. She remembered her younger days when she believed patience would be rewarded just for being patient. She had learned instead that the world rewarded those who claimed space, not those who waited quietly. Still, she had not learned to harden her heart completely. Some part of her refused to close. She had seen many men come and go. Some were loud and full of plans, some were gentle until they were not. None had stayed when things grew complicated. The widower was different, not because he promised anything, but because he did not. His silence felt honest. That scared her more than smooth words ever had. When they met again, it was near the edge of the settlement where the land opened wide. He stood facing her, hands empty, eyes steady. She noticed how still he was, like a man listening for something beneath the surface. For a moment, neither spoke. The space between them felt heavy with all that had not been said. He asked about her childhood, not prying, just enough to let her choose what to give. She spoke of growing up on land that no longer belonged to her family, of learning to work early, of understanding that some people were born with choices and others learned to make do. He listened, nodding once or twice, never interrupting. She wondered what stories he carried that made him listen that way. As they walked, they passed an old fence line, half fallen, its posts eaten by time. He stopped there, staring at it longer than necessary. She followed his gaze and saw only wood and wire. To him, it was another sign of how things changed without asking permission. He told her that fences made men forget how far the land could stretch. She smiled faintly, sensing there was more behind his words. Elsewhere in the settlement, a man watched them from a distance. He had arrived months earlier with money and ambition, and he did not like losing what he believed he deserved. He had noticed the woman long before the widower did, and had dismissed her just as quickly. Now her quiet refusal of others, paired with her choice of a man seen as lesser, stirred something bitter in him. He began asking questions, digging where the soil was loose. The widower felt it before he saw it. A tension in the air, a shift in how people looked at him. He knew this feeling from old days when trouble gathered itself slowly. He had hoped to avoid it, but hope had limits. The land did not care what he wanted. It only reflected what was coming. One afternoon, a child ran to him, breathless, saying strangers were asking about him, asking where he came from, what he had done before, why he lived as he did. The widower thanked the child and gave him a piece of dried fruit, then stood alone for a long time. The past was no longer content to stay buried. Someone was pulling at its edges. The woman noticed his unease that evening. His steps were heavier, his eyes more distant. She asked if something was wrong. He told her only that old things had a way of returning. She did not press, though every instinct told her this was a moment that mattered. She wondered if choosing him meant stepping into a story already half written. She went home that night and sat with her thoughts. She thought about how often she had been judged before being known. She thought about how quickly people decided what a person was worth. If the widower carried a past others feared, did that change the man she saw before her? She did not yet know the answer, but she knew she wanted to hear it from him, not from whispers. Meanwhile, the man asking questions uncovered fragments. Stories of an Apache warrior who once led others through raids and defenses. A man who had stood against both enemies and uneasy allies. The details were incomplete, but enough to stir fear in those who preferred simple labels. Fear spread faster than truth ever did. The widower stood at the edge of the land that night, staring into the dark. He remembered standing like this years ago, blood on his hands, knowing he had done what was necessary and still feeling the cost of it. He had promised himself he would not live that life again. Yet here he was, faced with a choice that might force him to claim it once more. The woman joined him quietly, not asking permission. She stood beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm. The desert wind moved around them, carrying the sound of distant voices. She told him she did not need perfection, only honesty when the time came. Her words were not a demand, but they landed like one. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not rejection or doubt, but strength shaped by endurance. He wanted to protect that strength, even if it meant risking his own fragile peace. Still, the words he needed to speak stayed locked behind years of habit and caution. As the settlement slept, plans formed without their knowledge. Men talked in low voices, measuring risk and reward. The widower's secret was no longer his alone. The woman sensed change in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Neither of them knew how close they were to a truth that would test every choice they had made. The land remembered their footsteps as they walked back toward the settlement, unaware that others were already tracing those same paths for different reasons. What lay ahead was still hidden, but its shape was beginning to show, and when it did, nothing between them would remain untouched. The days that followed grew tighter, as if the settlement itself had drawn a slow breath and refused to let it go. People spoke more quietly when the widower passed. Some nodded with forced politeness, others looked away too quickly. A few stared as if trying to match the man they saw now with the stories beginning to circulate. He felt their eyes like heat on his back but kept his pace steady. Fear fed on reaction, and he had learned long ago not to give it one. The woman noticed every change. She had lived long enough on the edges of other people's comfort to recognize when a place decided someone no longer fit. Doors closed a little faster. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms with him nearby. Even work came harder, as if association itself had become a quiet offense. Still, she did not step away from him. If anything, she stood closer, daring the world to make its judgment clear instead of hiding behind whispers. One afternoon, an older woman pulled her aside while pretending to straighten folded cloth. Her voice was low, edged with concern. She warned her that the widower was not who he seemed, that men like him carried trouble the way others carried tools. The woman listened without interrupting, then thanked her and returned to her work. Warnings were easy to give when the cost belonged to someone else. The widower spent more time walking the outskirts of the land. He followed old trails, some made by animals, others by memory. Each step stirred pieces of his former life. He remembered nights spent guarding his people, days filled with decisions that left no clean choices. He had believed that by becoming small, by living as less than he was, he could escape the reach of that past. Now he understood that shrinking did not erase shadows. It only changed their shape. From another angle, the man who had begun the questioning grew bolder. He spoke to traders, to travelers, to anyone who might carry a rumor further than he could. He framed his curiosity as concern for safety, as duty to the settlement. People listened because fear often wears the mask of responsibility. Slowly, the widower's name, once barely noticed, became something spoken with caution. The woman heard fragments of these conversations and felt a pull between anger and patience. She wanted to confront the talk head-on, but she also knew how quickly a woman's words could be dismissed as emotion. Instead, she observed. She noted who spoke with certainty and who spoke with doubt. She filed away every glance and half-sentence, building her own understanding piece by piece. One evening, as the sky darkened and fires were lit, a small group gathered near the center of the settlement. Their voices rose just enough to carry. They spoke of protection, of knowing who lived among them. No one named the widower, but everyone knew who stood at the center of the talk. He watched from a distance, the woman beside him, feeling the old tension coil in his chest. This was how it began before, with concern turning into action, action turning into regret. A child ran through the crowd and stopped near them, eyes wide. He whispered that men were arguing about sending someone to watch the widower's camp. The woman stiffened. The widower placed a hand lightly on her arm, grounding her without a word. Being watched was not new to him, but the reason for it felt different now. This was not about survival. It was about control. Later that night, the woman asked him again to tell her what he was hiding. Her voice was calm, but the question carried weight. He told her that once words were spoken, they could not be taken back. She replied that silence carried its own cost. They stood facing each other, the space between them filled with everything neither was ready to place down. Elsewhere, an older Apache man who had settled near the edge of the land watched events unfold with quiet concern. He recognized the widower, though many years had passed. He remembered the man as a leader who chose caution when others chose pride. He also remembered how leadership left marks no time could fully erase. He wondered whether stepping forward now would help or only bring more trouble. Some truths protected, others only sharpened the blade. The settlement grew restless, work slowed, tempers shortened, people began choosing sides without admitting it. The widower continued his routines, repairing tools, gathering water, offering help when asked. Each act of calm felt like a small defiance against the rising unease. The woman mirrored him, steady in her tasks, refusing to shrink or apologize. One morning, a stranger arrived with news from farther out. He spoke of tensions along the borderlands, of old conflicts stirring again. His words gave shape to fears already taking root. Some looked at the widower as if the land itself had delivered him as a warning. He listened without reacting, though every word pressed against memories he had hoped would stay quiet. The woman watched him closely that day. She saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes scanned the horizon as if measuring distance and time. She realized then that his past was not just personal. It was tied to histories larger than either of them. Loving him, she understood, might mean standing inside a story that did not care about fairness. As night fell, the widower walked alone to the place where he kept a small bundle buried beneath stones. He uncovered it carefully, revealing items he had not touched in years. Each piece carried weight and memory. He did not take them out, only looked, then covered them again. The choice to reclaim that life was one he had not yet made. The woman waited for him, her thoughts restless. She remembered all the times she had been passed over, all the times she had been told to accept less. Choosing him had been her first true act of claiming something for herself. She refused to let fear take that away without a fight, even if she did not yet know what that fight would require. The man spreading rumors sensed momentum shifting in his favor. He began speaking more openly, framing the widower as a threat that needed to be addressed before it grew. Some listened eagerly. Others hesitated, unsure whether they were protecting their home or feeding something darker. The line between caution and cruelty grew thinner by the day. The older Apache man finally approached the widower as the sun dipped low. He spoke quietly, reminding him that running from a past did not make it lose its teeth. The widower nodded, knowing the truth of it. He asked whether revealing himself now would ease the tension or inflame it. The older man did not answer directly. He only said that timing mattered as much as truth. That night, the settlement slept poorly. Dogs barked at shadows. Fires burned low but steady. The woman lay awake, listening to the sounds of the land, feeling the weight of what was coming press against her chest. She did not know whether morning would bring confrontation, confession, or something worse. The widower sat outside, eyes on the dark horizon. He felt the old resolve stirring, the part of him that had once stepped forward when others stepped back. He feared what embracing that part might cost, but he feared more what losing the woman beside him would mean. Between those fears he waited, knowing that soon waiting would no longer be an option. As the wind moved across the plains, carrying voices and secrets alike, the land remembered every step taken toward what was coming next. And in that memory the path ahead began to narrow, drawing all of them closer to a moment none could turn away from. The next morning arrived heavy with expectation. Even the birds seemed slower to break the quiet, their calls scattered and uncertain. The widower rose before first light, sensing that the day would not pass like the others. He washed his face, straightened his worn clothes, and stood still for a long moment, grounding himself in the rhythm of his breath. Whatever came next would not be met by hiding. The woman felt it too. She woke with a tightness in her chest she could not explain and dressed carefully, as if the way she presented herself might matter more than usual. When she stepped outside, she saw people already gathered in small groups, voices low, eyes alert. The settlement was awake in a way that had nothing to do with work. Word spread quickly that a meeting would be held near the center of the land. No one said why, but everyone knew. The man who had stirred the rumors stood among a few others, his posture confident, his expression controlled. He believed the moment favored him. The fear he had helped grow now stood tall enough to walk on its own. The widower walked toward the gathering without hesitation. The woman followed at his side, her presence steady and unmistakable. Some noticed and shifted uneasily. Others watched with open curiosity. The space ahead felt charged, as if the ground itself understood that something long delayed was finally arriving. When they reached the center, the voices quieted. The man who had been speaking stepped forward, addressing the crowd with practiced calm. He spoke of safety, of knowing who lived among them, of past actions carrying consequences. His words were careful, designed to sound reasonable while pointing without naming. The crowd listened, some nodding, some frowning, many unsure. The widower let him finish. When silence fell, he stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not posture. He simply stood as himself, no longer shrinking. He told them that fear thrived on half-truths. He told them that he had lived among them openly, offering work and respect. He did not yet speak of his past, but the weight of it was present in every word. The woman watched him, her heart pounding. She saw the man she had come to know and glimpses of the one he had been. Strength settled into his stance, not sharp or aggressive, but firm. She realized then that his choice to live as poor had never been weakness. It had been restraint. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some wanted more, others wanted less. The man who had begun this stepped forward again, pushing harder now. He hinted at old conflicts, at bloodshed, at danger returning if it was not confronted. His eyes flicked briefly to the woman, testing whether fear might pull her away. She did not move. Instead, an unexpected voice rose from the edge of the gathering. The older Apache man stepped into view. Time had curved his back, but not dulled his presence. He spoke slowly, reminding the settlement that stories without context were tools easily misused. He acknowledged the widower's past without detailing it, framing it as a life shaped by hard necessity, not reckless desire. The crowd shifted again. The ground beneath the accusations began to soften. Still, tension held firm. Too much had been said to simply return to quiet. The widower felt the pull to speak fully, to lay everything bare. He hesitated, not for himself, but for the woman beside him. Once spoken, truth could not be taken back. As if sensing this, the woman stepped forward. Her voice carried clearly, not loud but sure. She spoke of choice, of seeing a man by his actions, not his rumors, of knowing what it meant to be judged before being known. Her words did not excuse or accuse. They claimed space for fairness, something the settlement had begun to forget. Some looked at her with surprise, others with discomfort. She stood anyway, refusing to be small. In that moment, many saw her not as the most rejected woman, but as someone unafraid to stand where she believed she belonged. The man spreading fear felt the shift and pushed once more, his voice sharper now. He demanded full answers. He demanded certainty. The widower met his gaze and nodded once. He said that answers would come, but not shaped by threat or spectacle. He would speak when respect returned to the ground they stood on. That restraint unsettled the man more than anger would have. The crowd began to question his urgency, his insistence. Fear without clear direction often turned on its source. He sensed this and stepped back, his confidence thinning. As the meeting broke apart without resolution, tension remained thick. Some were relieved, others frustrated. The settlement did not return to normal. It hovered, waiting. The widower and the woman walked away together, aware that this pause was temporary. Later that day, the widower found signs that he was being watched more closely. Footprints near his camp. A tool moved slightly from where he had left it. The message was clear. Waiting was running out. He returned to the buried bundle and uncovered it again, this time lifting the items free. The weight in his hands felt familiar, both grounding and heavy with consequence. The woman spent the afternoon speaking quietly with those who would listen. She did not argue. She asked questions. She reminded people of what they had seen with their own eyes. Kindness planted carefully often grew where force failed. Still, she knew words alone would not settle what was coming. As evening fell, a storm gathered far off, clouds darkening the horizon. The air thickened, pressing down on the land. The settlement prepared for weather, unaware that another kind of breaking point was closer than rain. The widower returned as night approached, carrying the knowledge that he could no longer avoid. He found the woman waiting for him. Without speaking, he placed one of the items from his past between them, not as a threat, but as a truth offered. Her breath caught, but she did not step back. She asked him then, quietly, to tell her everything when the time was right. He promised that he would, not yet, but soon. The promise carried weight because it was no longer vague. It had direction. Across the settlement, plans continued. Some prepared to confront. Some prepared to flee. Some prepared to watch. The man who had stirred the fear sensed that the moment might slip from his control and considered more drastic steps. The storm overhead rolled closer, thunder distant but growing. The widower and the woman stood together beneath the darkening sky, aware that the next sunrise might change everything. Their hands brushed, not in comfort, but in shared resolve. Whatever came, they would face it without hiding. As the first drops of rain struck the dust, the land seemed to lean in, listening. Every path, every memory, every choice converged toward a moment that could no longer be delayed. The tension held tight, stretched to its limit, promising release soon, but not yet. The rain came hard after nightfall, washing dust from the air and pressing everyone indoors. Thunder rolled across the plains, steady and deep, like a warning spoken by the land itself. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the settlement quiet and changed. Wet earth darkened the ground, and the air felt cleaner, sharper. It was the kind of morning that made it impossible to pretend nothing had happened. The widower rose early and did not bury the items again. He wrapped them carefully and carried them with him as he walked toward the center of the settlement. His steps were calm, but his purpose was clear. The time for holding back had ended. He knew that truth once spoken would shape what followed, for better or worse. Still, he felt no regret. Some things were heavier to carry in silence than in the open. The woman walked beside him, her presence steady. She did not ask questions now. She trusted that the answers would come because he had promised they would. The settlement stirred as people noticed where they were headed. Word spread quickly, faster than the rain had fallen the night before. They gathered again, though this time no one called it a meeting. People simply came, drawn by instinct and curiosity. Faces showed caution, expectation, and fatigue. The man who had stirred fear stood among them, less certain now, his confidence dulled by the shift he could not control. The widower stepped forward and spoke before anyone else could. He told them who he had been. Not in boasting detail, but plainly. He spoke of leading when his people were under threat, of choosing defense when retreat meant destruction. He spoke of loss, of burying his wife and with her the life he had known. He explained why he had lived as poor, not to deceive, but to escape the weight of being measured only by strength. He did not deny the past. He placed it where it belonged, behind him, but not erased. He told them he had chosen a quieter life because he believed peace deserved effort too. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. The crowd listened in a silence that felt different from before. This was not fear holding them still. It was attention. The older Apache man nodded once, confirming what needed no embellishment. Others began to see the shape of the truth, how rumors had stretched thin facts into something darker than they were. The man who had spread fear tried to speak, but his words faltered. Without mystery to feed on, fear lost its power. The woman stepped forward then, her voice calm and clear. She spoke of what it meant to be judged without being known. She reminded them that the widower had lived among them with respect, never demanding more than his share. She spoke of choice, of seeing value where others saw only labels. Her words settled into the crowd slowly, taking root. Questions followed, but they were different now. Not accusations, but attempts to understand. The widower answered what he could and acknowledged what he could not change. No one asked him to leave. No one demanded punishment. What they asked for was assurance that the past would not return to claim them. He gave that assurance not as a promise of control, but as a commitment to stand with them if trouble came. The man who had stirred the unrest found himself isolated. His motives, once wrapped in concern, now showed their edges. He left the gathering quietly, his influence gone. No one stopped him. The land had already decided it had no use for what he brought. Life did not return to normal all at once. Trust never did, but it began. Work resumed. Doors opened again. Children laughed without glancing over their shoulders. The settlement breathed out. The widower returned to his camp and, for the first time in years, did not feel the need to hide any part of himself. He repaired what needed fixing and let the rest be. The woman visited often, their time together no longer shadowed by unspoken weight. When he finally told her everything, she listened without flinching. She did not excuse the past, nor did she hold it against him. She accepted it as part of the man she had chosen. In the weeks that followed, the land shifted into a gentler season. The woman found herself no longer overlooked. People greeted her by name, sought her counsel, trusted her judgment. She had not changed who she was. The world around her had learned to see more clearly. The widower began to take on responsibilities again, though not as a leader in the old sense. He helped settle disputes, offered guidance, and stood watch when needed. He did not wear authority like armor. He wore it like a tool, used only when required. One evening, as the sun lowered itself into the hills, the woman stood beside him at the edge of the land. The light painted everything gold, softening lines and shadows alike. He told her that he wished to walk forward with her openly, without veils or half-lives. She smiled, not wide or dramatic, but true. She told him she had already been walking that way. Their joining was simple. No grand ceremony, no declarations meant for others. Just a shared understanding, witnessed by the land and a small circle of those who mattered. The settlement marked it quietly, with food shared and stories exchanged. It felt right, unforced. In time, the widower no longer dressed to appear poor. He wore what suited the work of the day. The woman stood at his side, not as someone rescued or redeemed, but as a partner chosen and choosing in return. Together, they became a reminder that worth was not decided by first impressions or loud voices. The land remembered their footsteps too, but differently now. It remembered two people who had walked through judgment and fear without letting either define them. It remembered a widower who laid down grief without forgetting love, and a woman once rejected who claimed her place without apology. Years later, people would tell the story differently depending on who spoke. Some would focus on the mystery, others on the conflict. But those who knew the truth understood that it was not about hiding or revealing alone. It was about choosing honesty, even when it cost something. And when the desert wind moved across the plains at dusk, it carried not whispers of fear, but the steady sound of a life lived fully at last.